The steady rhythm of typing filled the spacious office, the only sound in an otherwise silent room. Lucas Carter barely acknowledged the door swinging open, his focus glued to the screen in front of him. "This better be urgent." His voice was calm but edged with impatience. A billion-dollar empire didn't run itself, and interruptions were rarely welcome. His assistant, Nina, cleared her throat. "Your new executive assistant is here." Lucas exhaled sharply, finally glancing up. He didn't particularly care who they had hired, only that they were competent enough to keep up with him. "Fine, send them in." Then the woman walked in, and his entire world tilted. Lucas's fingers froze over the keyboard. His breath hitched, because standing in front of him wasn't just any assistant. The past crashed into him like a wave. Warm summer afternoons, late-night whispers, a promise made under the stars. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "Lena?" She blinked, confusion flickering across her face. "Yes, do I know you?" Then recognition dawned. Her eyes widened. "Lucas?" Lucas pushed back from his desk so quickly that his chair nearly toppled over. This can't be real. Lena Parker, his childhood best friend, his first love, the girl who had once meant everything to him. And now she was standing in his office, completely unaware that she had just thrown his world off balance. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Then Lena let out a breathless laugh. "Wow, this is unexpected." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, his mind scrambling to catch up. "You're my new assistant?" She gave an awkward nod. "I had no idea this was your company." Lucas exhaled slowly, the weight of 15 years pressing down on him. After she had moved away, they had lost touch. And now, after all this time, she had walked right back into his life. He shook his head, still trying to process. Wow." Lena chuckled, though there was a nervous edge to it. "Is this weird?" Lucas's lips twitched. "Oh, definitely." She laughed, and for a brief moment it was as if nothing had changed, as if they were still two kids daring each other to climb the tallest tree in the neighborhood. But the moment passed, reality set in. She was his employee. He was her boss. And he was completely, utterly screwed. The first few days were absolute torture. Lucas found himself watching Lena more than he should. The way she furrowed her brow in concentration, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was focused, the way she laughed, soft, genuine, untouched by time. And she was brilliant. Sharp, quick thinking, unfazed by the chaos of his schedule. But it wasn't just that. She still knew him. She still had that ability to predict what he needed before he even asked. And worst of all, she still had the power to unravel him without even trying. Like now, Lena walked into his office and set a cup of coffee on his desk. "You need to take a break." Lucas raised a brow. "You've been here less than a week, and you're already giving me orders?" She crossed her arms. "Lucas, I knew you when you thought eating an entire bag of marshmallows was a good idea. You think I'm intimidated by Lucas Carter?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Noted." Lena leaned against his desk, a playful glint in her eyes. And in that moment, Lucas knew. This was going to be a disaster. Because no matter how much he tried to deny it, he was already falling for her again. Lena crossed her arms, tilting her head with a teasing smile. "So, do you still eat way too much candy?" Lucas smirked. "No, but the sock situation, still a disaster." She laughed, shaking her head. "Some things never change." His chest tightened. "No, they don't." And neither did his feelings, because despite everything, despite 15 years apart, he was falling for her all over again, hard, and this time he wasn't sure he could stop it. Lucas had always prided himself on control. Control over his company, control over his emotions, control over his life. But with Lena back in his orbit, that control was slipping through his fingers like sand. Every day she was there, efficient, sharp, completely unaware of the effect she had on him. She moved through his office like she belonged, as if the years apart had never happened. And that was the problem. Because Lucas couldn't stop thinking about the past. About the girl who used to challenge him to climb the tallest trees. The girl who had once stolen his jacket on a chilly autumn night and refused to give it back. The girl he had told in a rare moment of childhood bravery, "I'll always protect you." Lena had been his best friend. And then, she was gone. Now she was here. But she wasn't just Lena anymore. She was his assistant. And he was her boss. The boundaries were clear, weren't they? He was trying to keep things professional. Really. But then came the gala. It was an annual event, one of the most important nights for Hayes Industries. Investors, partners, high-profile clients. Lena had been handling everything, managing the logistics so flawlessly that Lucas barely had to think about it. Then, an hour before they were supposed to leave, she knocked on his office door. He looked up and forgot how to breathe. Lena stood in the doorway, wearing a floor-length, midnight blue gown that fit her like it had been made just for her. The soft fabric skimmed her curves, and the delicate straps left just enough of her shoulders bare to make his pulse stutter. She wasn't just beautiful. She was breathtaking. Lucas forced himself to speak. "You're coming?" She lifted a brow, amused. "I organized half this event. Did you think I was just going to stay home and hope it went well?" He cleared his throat, pushing back whatever ridiculous thoughts were creeping into his head. Right, of course. She stepped inside, adjusting the bracelet on her wrist. "Don't look so surprised." Then, with a teasing smirk, "Besides, you need someone to make sure you don't scare off the investors." Lucas scoffed. "I don't scare people." Lena gave him a pointed look. "Lucas, your neutral expression alone has probably terrified half your board members." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Fine, you win." But as they arrived at the gala, Lucas quickly realized Lena wasn't just there to keep things running smoothly. She belonged in this world. Effortlessly, she moved through the crowd with confidence, engaging in conversations with ease. Investors who usually required weeks of negotiation were charmed within minutes. Clients who were notoriously difficult were laughing at her jokes. Lucas had always known she was brilliant, had always known she was capable. But watching her now, he saw something else, something he hadn't fully acknowledged before. She wasn't just the girl from his past. She was a woman who could hold her own in any room. A woman who, if he wasn't careful, could completely dismantle the careful walls he had built around himself. And then, just when he thought the night couldn't shake him any further, he overheard something that made his stomach tighten. "She's impressive," one of his senior executives commented to another. Lucas's jaw clenched, because the next word sent a bolt of something sharp and possessive through his chest. She's exactly the kind of woman who could make a man like Hayes finally settle down. And the worst part? Lucas wasn't sure they were wrong. She's impressive. Lucas barely acknowledged the conversation happening a few feet away, or at least he tried to act like he didn't. "Another one of Carter's assistants?" "Yeah," the other man responded. "But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he was interested in her. Did you see the way he looks at her?" Lucas stiffened. The way he looked at her, his jaw clenched. He forced himself to turn away to pretend he hadn't heard a word, because acknowledging it meant facing the truth. And the truth? The truth was dangerous. Because the truth was, he was interested. More than interested. And that terrified him. For weeks, Lucas had convinced himself that he could keep things professional with Lena, that he could ignore the pull, the way his pulse skipped whenever she was near. But the gala had shattered that illusion. Watching her command a room, charm investors, and fit so effortlessly into his world, it had been a wake-up call. He wanted her. And it wasn't just some fleeting attraction. It was deeper, something he had buried for years. But the problem remained. She worked for him. And Lena, blissfully unaware of the war raging inside him, continued on as if nothing had changed. Late nights in the office became a dangerous game of restraint. She'd bring him coffee without asking, already knowing exactly how he liked it. She'd tease him when he got too serious, effortlessly diffusing the tension that always built between them. And worst of all, she trusted him completely, which was why, when she knocked on his office door one evening, frustration evident in her eyes, he braced himself. "Lucas, we have a problem." The urgency in her tone snapped him into focus. "What is it?" Lena stepped inside, placing a folder on his desk and flipping it open. The Crawley deal. The contracts have discrepancies. The acquisition terms don't match what was agreed upon in negotiations. Lucas's jaw tightened. The Crawley deal was massive. Any misstep could cost his company millions. How bad is it? He asked. Lena met his gaze, steady and unshaken. Bad enough that if we don't fix it before the signing tomorrow, we could be locked into terms that favor Crawley's side. Lucas scanned the documents, irritation simmering beneath his skin. Someone had either made a careless mistake, or worse, deliberately altered the terms. Either way, it needed to be fixed. He leaned back, exhaling sharply. We're going to have to go through everything, line by line. This is going to take all night. Lena didn't hesitate. Then let's get to work. He should have told her to go home, that this wasn't her battle to fight. But before he could say anything, she had already taken a seat across from him, flipping through the pages with a determined expression. And Lucas, he found himself watching her. The way she chewed her lip in concentration. The way she made precise notes in the margins, her handwriting small and neat. The way she'd never hesitated, never backed down from a challenge. Hours passed. Intense silence filled the office, interrupted only by the occasional exchange of findings. Midnight came and went. Outside, the city quieted. Inside, they worked, side by side. At some point, Lena stretched, rolling her shoulders. I think I found another inconsistency in Section 5. Lucas rubbed the back of his neck, exhaustion creeping in. Good, let's flag it. She glanced at him, concern flickering in her eyes. You need a break? He smirked. I could say the same for you. Lena leaned back in her chair, smiling faintly. This job is going to turn me into a workaholic, isn't it? Lucas's lips twitched. Welcome to my world. She studied him for a moment. You don't ever slow down, do you? He hesitated. No one had ever asked him that. Finally, he exhaled. I can't afford to. Lena tilted her head, considering him. You built this empire. You could step back if you wanted to. Lucas shook his head. Stepping back means losing control, and in this world, control is everything. She frowned slightly, as if she didn't entirely agree. But she didn't press the issue. Instead, she simply reached for a pen and kept going. And Lucas, despite every warning in his head, kept watching her. Lena absent-mindedly tapped her pen against the table, her gaze thoughtful. You know, when we were kids, you used to say you wanted to invent something crazy. Something no one had ever thought of before. Lucas blinked. He hadn't thought about that in years. She smiled faintly. You had all these wild ideas, a self-cleaning treehouse, a robot that could do your homework. Lucas let out a low chuckle. I had my priorities. Lena laughed softly, shaking her head. I guess I just wonder, do you ever miss that? Lucas stared at her, something shifting in his chest. No one had ever asked him that before. And for the first time, he wasn't sure he had an answer. But before he could respond, Lena yawned, covering her mouth. Lucas immediately stood up. That's it. You're done for the night. She blinked at him. But we're not finished. I'll handle the rest. His tone left no room for argument. You need sleep. Lena hesitated, but exhaustion was etched into her features. Finally, she relented, pushing her chair back. Fine, but don't stay up all night either. Lucas smirked. No promises. She rolled her eyes but didn't argue, gathering her things and heading for the door. And as she left, something settled heavily in his gut. Because Lena wasn't just someone from his past anymore. She was in his present. And if he was being honest with himself, he wanted her in his future. Lucas had spent years navigating high-stakes business deals, forging billion-dollar contracts, and handling ruthless corporate negotiations. Yet nothing had prepared him for Lena Sullivan. She had unraveled him completely. That night, after they had worked late on the Crawley deal, he had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. The quiet concern in her eyes when she looked at him. The way her laugh still had the power to shake something loose inside him. And worst of all, the way she had reminded him of who he used to be. Before his life had become a relentless chase for success, before he had convinced himself that nothing else mattered. He was slipping, and he knew it. But the truth was, he didn't want to fight this anymore. The realization hit him like a freight train. There was no denying it. He wanted Lena. Not just as a fleeting desire, not just as a passing attraction. He wanted her in his life, permanently. And that meant he had to do something about it. The next morning, Lucas walked into the office with a plan. He wasn't going to wait for things to unfold naturally. He had spent too much time letting life dictate his choices. This was one thing he wasn't going to leave to chance. But before he could act, fate threw a wrench in his plans. He stepped into his office to find Lena standing by the window, her posture tense, her hands gripping a piece of paper. She turned when she heard him enter, and the look on her face sent a sharp pulse of unease through him. "I need to talk to you." Her voice was quieter than usual. Lucas closed the door behind him. "What's wrong?" She hesitated, then handed him the paper. He took it, scanning the contents quickly, and felt his stomach turn to stone. A job offer, a high-level position at a different company. A competitor. His grip tightened on the page. "You're leaving?" The words came out harsher than he intended. Lena shook her head quickly. "No, I haven't accepted. I don't even know if I want to." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I got the offer last night, and I thought you should know." Lucas exhaled sharply, forcing himself to think. Of course she was being recruited. She was brilliant, sharp, capable. Anyone who had seen her in action would know she was an asset. The logical part of him knew that, but the emotional part, the part he had spent years suppressing, that part was screaming at him that he couldn't let this happen. He set the paper down on his desk, his gaze locking onto hers. "Do you want to take it?" Lena hesitated. Then, softly, "I don't know." And Lucas, for the first time in his life, felt like he was standing on the edge of something he wasn't willing to lose. Lucas took a step closer, his pulse hammering. "Lena, if you're staying out of loyalty, don't you deserve to do what's best for you?" She looked up at him, eyes filled with conflict. "It's not just about the job, Lucas." His throat tightened. "Then what is it about?" A tense silence stretched between them, and then, finally, Lena spoke. "I don't know if I can keep working for you." Lucas's chest clenched. "Why?" "Not because of the job." Her voice was softer now. "Not because of the workload, but because of this." She gestured between them. Whatever this is, there it was, out in the open. Lucas didn't hesitate. He couldn't. He took another step forward, closing the space between them. "This," he said, voice steady, "is me realizing that I don't want to go another day pretending I don't feel something for you." Lena's breath hitched. Lucas reached for her hand, holding it gently. "I spent years thinking I had moved on from the past." His voice was quiet but firm. "But then you walked into my office and suddenly nothing made sense anymore." Lena's fingers curled around his, instinctively. Her eyes searched his face, uncertain, vulnerable. "Lucas?" He cupped her face, tilting her chin up. "Tell me you don't feel this too," he whispered. "And I'll let you go. I swear I will." A single moment of silence. Then she exhaled shakily. "I do." The words sent a rush of relief through him, but he didn't move. Not yet. He needed to hear all of it. "But I'm scared," she admitted. Lucas stilled. "This job, this company, it means everything to you." She swallowed hard. "If we risk this and it goes wrong," Lucas shook his head. "I don't care about the company more than I care about you." Lena blinked, caught off guard. He tightened his grip on her hand. "I built this company from nothing, and I'm proud of it, but it's not my life. You are." A sharp inhale, a flicker of emotion in her eyes, and then, finally, she broke. She surged forward, wrapping her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. Lucas held her tightly, feeling something inside him settle for the first time in years. She wasn't just his past, she was his future, and this time, he wasn't going to let her go. Lucas Carter had never been the type to hesitate. He made decisions quickly, with the full weight of his confidence behind them. But standing in his office, holding Lena close, he realized this was the first time in years that a choice had truly mattered. Because this wasn't just business. It wasn't just attraction. It was her. And nothing, not his company, not the complications of their professional relationship, not even his own fears, was more important than that. When she finally pulled back, her eyes searched his, uncertainty lingering in her expression. "I don't know how to do this," Lucas exhaled, brushing his thumb gently against her cheek. "Then we'll figure it out together." A ghost of a smile tugged at her lips, but hesitation still flickered in her gaze. "Lucas, this changes everything." He nodded. "I know." Lena hesitated. "And if it doesn't work?" He didn't even flinch. "Then at least we tried, but I'm not going to let fear stop me from being with you." She let out a slow breath as if weighing the truth of his words. Then, finally, she nodded. Relief rushed through him. But he didn't let himself revel in it for long. There were still things that needed to be addressed, things he wouldn't let fester into problems. "We need to be smart about this," he said. "I don't want you to feel like your career is tied to me." Lena frowned slightly. "What are you saying?" Lucas held her gaze, serious now. "If you want another position in the company, I'll make that happen. 2, if you want to take that other job, I won't stop you, but this." His voice softened. "Us." And Lena, she wasn't looking away anymore. "I don't want this to be something you regret later." Lena studied him for a long moment. "I don't want to leave." Something inside Lucas loosened at her words. "But then, I also don't want to be seen as the CEO's girlfriend who got special treatment." Lucas smirked. "You do realize you've spent the past few months bossing me around more than any assistant I've ever had, right?" A laugh escaped her, and the tension between them eased slightly. "I mean it," he continued, his voice softer now. "You've earned everything here on your own. But if you'd be more comfortable in a different role, we'll make that happen." She considered his words. "Let me think about it." "Of course." For the first time since she had walked into his office all those weeks ago, things felt settled. Not entirely, not perfectly, but for the first time, there was no unspoken tension hanging between them. Lucas had her, and he wasn't going to let anything ruin that. For the next few weeks, they navigated the shift carefully. At work, Lena remained as professional as ever. But there was an ease between them now, a quiet understanding. She still challenged him, still kept him in check, but there were moments, fleeting glances, lingering touches when no one was watching. Moments that made it impossible to ignore how much had changed. Outside the office, things were different. Their first official date had been a quiet rooftop dinner at his penthouse, away from prying eyes. Lucas had cooked, something he hadn't done in years, and Lena had teased him relentlessly about it. "You're a billionaire, Lucas. You could literally hire any chef in the world." He smirked, pouring her a glass of wine. "But then I wouldn't get to impress you with my mediocre pasta." She laughed, shaking her head. "I hate to break it to you, but I think your assistant, whoever she was before me, has been ordering takeout and lying to you about it." Lucas chuckled, shaking his head. "Probably." But despite the teasing, the night had been perfect, because it had been just them. No company, no business, no complications, and Lucas realized then he had never been happier. Of course, nothing stayed simple forever. A few weeks later, the inevitable happened. Whispers started circulating in the office. At first it was subtle, curious glances, hushed conversations as they walked by. But then, one afternoon, Meredith, his assistant, stepped into his office with a knowing look. "You're not exactly subtle, you know." Lucas raised a brow. "Excuse me?" She smirked. "You and Lena. People are talking." Lucas exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "I figured this would happen eventually." Meredith crossed her arms. "So what's the plan? Because if you think you can just ignore it and hope it goes away, you're underestimating how much people love office gossip." Lucas wasn't surprised. He had built his company on control, on calculated decisions. His employees respected him, but they also thrived on speculation, and he had no intention of letting rumors dictate his relationship. "We're going to be honest about it," he said simply. Meredith blinked. "Really?" Lucas nodded. "There's nothing inappropriate about it. We're two consenting adults, and Lena has already decided to move into a different department to avoid any conflicts." Meredith let out a low whistle. "Well, that'll certainly shut down most of the office gossip. People were probably expecting some big scandal." Lucas smirked. They'll be disappointed then. Meredith chuckled. Probably. But for what it's worth, I think you two make a great team. A warmth spread through his chest. Because for the first time, he truly believed that too. Things had finally settled. Lena had transitioned into a new role, one she had chosen for herself, one that suited her skills and ambitions. The rumors had died down, replaced by the natural rhythm of work. And Lucas? He had everything he could have ever wanted. One evening, as they walked through the city after dinner, Lena slipped her hand into his. You know, she mused, glancing up at him. I think 12-year-old Lucas would be very proud of you. Lucas raised a brow. Yeah? She nodded. You always said you wanted to build something great, and you did. Lucas studied her in the glow of the streetlights. I did. But then, turns out the thing I'm most proud of isn't the company. Lena tilted her head. Then what is it? He squeezed her hand. You. Lena's breath caught. For a moment she just stared at him, emotion flickering in her eyes. Then, with a soft laugh, she leaned up and kissed him. And Lucas knew, without a doubt, that he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. Lucas Carter had never been a man who doubted his decisions. He had built his empire with relentless ambition, forged his success through sheer determination. Yet standing in his penthouse, Lena in his arms, certainty took on a new meaning. This wasn't just another calculated risk. This was his future. As the weeks passed, their relationship became effortless and undeniable. Their worlds, once tangled in complications and unspoken feelings, had shifted into something solid. Lena wasn't just a part of his life, she was his life. But even perfection had its challenges. One evening, after a long day at work, Lucas arrived home to find Lena sitting on the couch, a thoughtful expression on her face. Something about her stillness made him pause. He set his briefcase down and joined her, sensing the weight of whatever was on her mind. What's going on? She hesitated, then met his gaze. I got a call today. From my parents. Lucas leaned back slightly, surprised. Lena rarely spoke about her family. He knew they had moved away when she was young. He knew their relationship was complicated at best. She exhaled, tracing her fingers along the seam of a cushion. They're in town. Her voice was measured, but there was an undercurrent of uncertainty. They want to meet for dinner. Lucas studied her carefully. And how do you feel about that? A sigh escaped her. Conflicted. She hesitated before continuing. I haven't seen them in years. We were never exactly close, and when I moved back to the city I didn't expect them to suddenly reach out. But now they're insisting. Lucas reached for her hand, running his thumb along her knuckles. Do you want to see them? She exhaled slowly. I think so. Then, more softly, but I don't know what they expect. She hesitated, then looked up at him. I want you to come with me. Something warm spread through his chest. This wasn't just about a dinner. This was Lena letting him into a part of her life she had always kept guarded. Lucas didn't hesitate. Of course I'll go. Relief flickered in her expression, and she leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. Thank you. Lucas pressed a kiss to her hair. Whatever happens, you won't face it alone. The restaurant was elegant but understated. The kind of place where conversations remained hushed, where the lighting cast everything in a soft glow. Lucas arrived with Lena, his hand resting on the small of her back, in a gesture of quiet reassurance. Her parents were already seated. As they approached, Lucas noticed the way Lena subtly steeled herself. Her mother, impeccably dressed, her posture perfect, watched them with a neutral expression. Her father, slightly more relaxed, offered a polite nod. As they sat, introductions were made. And just like that, the past she had spent years running from was now sitting right in front of her. As expected, Lena's parents instantly recognized who Lucas was. His name carried weight in this city. And their reactions were a mix of intrigue and quiet assessment. The conversation started off polite. Small talk, questions about Lena's work, passing comments about the city. But beneath it all, there was something unspoken. Something unsaid between Lena and her parents. It wasn't until halfway through the meal that her mother finally addressed it. She set down her wine glass, her expression carefully composed. "We were surprised to hear you stayed in the city." A pause. "Especially considering how quickly you left all those years ago." Lena's grip on her fork tightened slightly. "I left because I needed to." Silence stretched between them. Then, her mother's voice, quieter now. "And you never reached out." Lucas felt the weight of Lena's silence before she finally spoke. "Neither did you." Her father cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "We made mistakes," he admitted. "But we want to fix things now." Lena's gaze remained steady. "Why now?" Her mother hesitated. Then, "Because we realized we don't want to spend the rest of our lives estranged from our only daughter." Under the table, Lena's fingers brushed against Lucas's, a fleeting touch, but one that spoke volumes. She was holding herself together. But this wasn't easy. Lucas didn't interject. This was her moment. Her choice. After a long pause, Lena exhaled. "I don't know if we can just pretend the past doesn't exist." A beat of silence. "But if you're willing to try, so am I." Something softened in her father's expression. Her mother gave a small nod. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And as they left the restaurant later that night, Lucas wrapped an arm around Lena's shoulders, pulling her close. His voice was low, meant only for her. "I'm proud of you." Lena glanced up at him, and for the first time that evening, her gaze held something lighter. "I think I'm proud of me too." Months passed. Life fell into place, in a way that felt effortless, natural. Lena's relationship with her family remained tentative, but improving. Her career flourished in her new position. And Lucas? Lucas knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he had never been more certain of anything in his life. One evening, they stood on his penthouse balcony, the city stretching before them, endless, full of possibilities. Lena leaned against the railing, her hair catching in the breeze. Lucas turned to her, reaching into his pocket. She glanced at him, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "What?" Lucas took a steady breath. Then, he dropped to one knee. Lena's breath hitched. "Lucas." His voice was steady, certain. "I've spent years building a life I thought I wanted, but none of it means anything without you." A soft, stunned laugh escaped her. "Nathan," he pulled out the ring. The diamond caught the light, shimmering between them. "I don't want a life where you're just a part of it. I want a life with you, forever." Lena stared at him, eyes shining, and then, with absolute certainty, she smiled. Yes. The moment the word left her lips, Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. The city stretched before them, a world of possibilities. But Lucas only cared about one thing: the woman in his arms. His future. His forever. As this journey comes to an end, I want to take a moment to thank you, our incredible readers, for following along, for feeling every emotion, and for sharing in the ups and downs of Lucas and Lena's story. Your time, your engagement, and your love for storytelling mean everything. But remember, every ending is just the beginning of another adventure. Stay tuned for more heartwarming stories, and don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts. Until next time, keep believing in love, in fate, and in the magic of unexpected moments. Bookmark. Thank you.